So in this segment, I'm going to show you how to use the pattern for the skirt to make a lining pattern. I'm going to start with the back piece, and this one will be cut on the fold, so I will only trace off 1/2 of the back skirt pattern piece. I'm laying the center back line along the straight edge of the paper and securing it down. Tracing it carefully. The skirt pattern, the outside pattern, not the lining, has a 1.5 inch hem allowance. And I want the finished edge of the hem of the lining to be about 1 inch shorter than the finished edge of the skirt. That's what the little dot is, to show me that it's going to come 1 inch above the finished edge of the skirt. What I'm going to do is have a fold up hem, a double fold where I press 3/4 of an inch up and then another 3/4 of an inch and stitch it for the lining. So to do that, I'm going to actually take off 1 inch from the pattern for the outside fabric. And that's what I'm doing now. I traced the pattern for the skirt, and I'm going to eliminate 1 inch from that hem line. So this cut edge will be the cut edge of the lining, and if I fold it twice, 3/4 of an inch and 3/4 of an inch, the finished edge will be 1 inch shorter than the outside skirt. Filling in notches. A reminder to place on the fold of the fabric. Center back. Center back waistline notch. Filling in my 3/8 inch seam allowance at the waist. Three-quarter seam allowance down the side seam. A notch at the waist and side seam intersection at the hip. Creating a grain line. The grain line can be anywhere in the skirt pattern as long as it's parallel to the center back. And a cross grain at the hip line, perpendicular to the center back line. And again, always label each piece whose name belongs on that piece so that later you don't get them confused with other pattern pieces and what it is. This is the back, and I'm going to cut one on the fold. And now to create the front lining pattern piece. Because of the facing, the fold under facing, I don't need the lining piece to extend as far past the center front as the outside garment. So I'm creating a seam allowance, and this seam allowance will be marked center front and will be sewn into the center front of the garment, as you will see when I go to assemble the fabric pieces. So I made a 1/2 inch seam allowance, marking center front, and now aligning the center front of the outside fabric pattern piece onto that center front of the lining. Tracing the pattern just like I did the back piece. transferring notches. Filling in the seam allowance at the waist. Transferring the markings, 3/4 seam allowance down the side seam. And now, to be sure that my side seams are exactly the same lengths, I'm taking the back lining pattern and applying it to the front lining pattern to mark the hem line at the side seam, just to be sure that the two pattern pieces are exactly the same at that point. And just like the back pattern piece, I'm taking off some of the pattern to create a shorter version for the lining. Aligning the side seam so that I can transfer the hip grain line. And now all pieces for the skirt are ready. We have the outside pattern pieces for the front and back, and under those are the lining pieces, front and back, pocket, waistband, and pocket facing.